We're quickly approaching the end of the provincial election campaign here in New Brunswick. Recent polls suggested this election is going to come down to the wire, with any swing in particular demographics being really important and impactful. In Fredericton specifically, young voters are going to be really important. Today, I'm joined by Susan Holt, the leader of the Liberal Party. Thank you for coming here. We really appreciate your time, especially, less than a week away, quite busy. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no worries. So I've seen that you were on UMB campus recently, I believe last week. Were you able to talk to any students about any of their concerns leading up to the election?
Yeah, we talked to a number of students that either came to chat with us at the table or that we chatted with in the sub, and heard lots of different concerns, actually, depending on the program of study of the students that we were talking to. I talked to a couple nursing students in particular who expressed some of their concerns about the healthcare system and the job opportunities and the working conditions for nurses in New Brunswick. Talked to other students about policies around housing and around how to make rents more affordable, how to build more housing supply, that kind of thing. So it was great. It was great to be on campus last week.
Yeah, and we recently had an Aquinian story where we talked to a few students around campus to kind of get their concerns leading up to the election as well. The main ones we heard being the rising rent, rising price of groceries, as well as, of course, tuition. What do you have to say about that?
We're hearing about the challenges of the cost of living all over the province, and particularly for students. When we talk to students, the number one cost of living issue we hear is rent. Rents in New Brunswick have gone up a lot over the last 4 years. I think it's 34%. And last year alone, rents went up more than 10%. That's a huge increase to one of the biggest expenses that most people pay every month. And so a lot of students are struggling to find an affordable place to live or to pay those kinds of rents. Our team's been looking at this for a while. For the last 2 years, we've been talking with different researchers, different folks who are in the housing space, folks on campus and with universities around how we get more student housing built and what we can do to make rents affordable. So our party has committed to a rent cap so that there is a predictable and constrained amount that rents can increase each year. We think that that'll make a difference because we see a policy like that in place in Nova Scotia and PEI and Quebec and Ontario. All across the country, there are rent caps in place that provide some of that stability to renters. But that's not the only thing we need to do because we still need more housing, right? It's one thing to cap rents, but if you can't even find an apartment to rent, then it doesn't matter if the rent is capped. So we have to make sure we're incentivizing the building of more housing and more different kinds of housing. So we've matched Nova Scotia and PEI's commitment to take the tax off of multi-unit developments, something that has seen them get twice the housing starts in those provinces than we have here in New Brunswick. We're going to overhaul the property tax system and take away the double tax on apartments, non-owner occupied dwellings, because that often gets passed down to the tenant and is a disincentive to development here in New Brunswick. And then we've been talking with universities about how we can support them to build more student housing and a diversity of student housing for both mature students and for new students and for international students to make sure we have the kind of housing that different people need in New Brunswick.
Yeah, and you mentioned the rent cap. That has been a big part of your campaign so far. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit more in terms of the details that students might not understand?
Thankfully, it's a pretty simple policy, and the government actually had a rent cap in place in New Brunswick a number of years ago. So they had put a 3.8% cap on rents in place, so that meant that landlords couldn't increase rent more than 3.8%. Now, one of the issues we had with how the Higgs government had done it was they put the onus on the tenant to report that the rent increase was too high. We don't think that that's where the onus should be. So under our program, we're going to cap rents at 3% increases, and the onus is on the landlord to apply or to flag if they want to do an increase greater than that. It shouldn't be work for the tenant to express that they've received a rent increase that's too high. We need landlords to make the case and apply for why they might need to increase rents more than 3% and have a body that's in place to decide that, no, that's not a legitimate reason to increase rents more than that 3% level. So it's going to go in place permanently. It will get reviewed on an annual basis because if things change, we're going to be looking at vacancy rate, we're going to be looking at inflation and at the market to determine whether that rent cap needs to come down or whether it needs to go up to respond to what's happening in the market and where rents are going and where availability is going. So we have to make sure that we're constantly on top of it, because the goal is to provide people with a predictable rent. You don't want to be surprised when your landlord shows up with a letter in the mail giving you 60 days notice that your rent's going to go up $150 a month, and you've got 60 days to figure it out. That's not a lot of time for anyone to change where they live and how they're housed, right? So we've got to make sure there's lots of notice, lots of predictability for folks about what's often their biggest monthly expense.
Yeah, and I mentioned tuition earlier as well. With tuition increases going up so much recently, it's become more of a burden on students recently than it used to be. What can a provincial government do in order to kind of ease the rising cost of tuitions for students?
Well, there's a big partnership between the provincial government and universities and colleges in New Brunswick, because there's funding that flows from the provincial government to universities and colleges that affect their ability to cover the cost of delivering education and thus how they set tuitions. What I think we need to do is make sure that when you start a program, you have certainty on what that tuition is going to be all the way through. You shouldn't start paying one amount in your first year of university and only to find that next year it's a lot more expensive than you thought, and then it goes up again, and by the time you're in your fourth year or your fifth year, you're paying way more than you had been paying in your first year. We'd like to lock in a predictable term so that universities and colleges have to commit that when you start, this is what's going to be your tuition all the way through, which means they need reliable funding from the provincial government to be able to do that, which they don't have right now, right? They're getting annual budgets that without confirmation of how that funding is going to come in future years, right? If we can give universities certainty on what the provincial government funding is, then we can ask them in return to provide that certainty to students with tuition schedules that are fixed from the time you start your program to when you finish it.
Yeah, and can you go into what means the Liberal Party would go through to ensure that that would happen?
Well, that's a policy that we can do within a part of government that's called the Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labor. That's the department that's responsible for funding agreements with post-secondary institutions. And so it's a matter of putting in place predictable funding for the universities with the stipulation that they pass that predictability on to students. So we can mandate that the funding is conditional on those predictable tuition schedules.
Yeah, and are there any other policies or campaigns that the Liberal Party is fighting for over the course of this campaign period, as well as moving forward, that you would like students to know about?
Oh, there's lots. I mean, the cost of living is one that we have to tackle in multiple ways. So we're looking to make the cost of heating less expensive. It's one of those essential items. We don't have a choice here in New Brunswick not to turn on the heat in the winter. And we've seen people's power bills going up and up and up. And so we want to treat energy like the essential item that it is, like groceries, and take the tax off of it. The provincial government shouldn't be getting a windfall because you're trying to keep your home or your apartment warm. So we're going to take that 10% provincial tax off of NB Power electricity bills to save folks money every month to try and make life more affordable. We're going to take the Higgs tax off of the price of gas. That's something that was supposed to be borne by the refineries, but instead Mr. Higgs decided to put it on consumers. And unfortunately, as you probably know, in Fredericton, we don't have the kind of transit adoption that we'd love to see. There are a lot of students that are still driving to campus. We can see it with the parking lot out there that is always tough to find a spot. And so sometimes there's no choice to, especially if you're trying to find an apartment and you have to find an apartment that's a little ways away from school to find one that's available and affordable, then the price of gas is one of those expenses that we want to reduce for students and for everyone. We are really focused on healthcare. The one piece I'd love to flag about that is a focus on mental health. Mental health has long been considered like a side note to the healthcare system. It's treated separately, differently, more privately, right? It's not integrated into our Medicare system, and it's not integrated in terms of how we manage health. But we think New Brunswickers should have easy access to mental health services because mental health is healthcare. And we've seen some progress on campus with universities prioritizing student mental health and hiring counselors and trying to make those services available. We think all New Brunswickers should have access to mental health professionals. And so we have a program in place to create more spaces for clinical psychologists and clinical psychiatry to have those funded in post-secondary institutions across the province. We need to see more school psychologists in K-12 so that we can build good habits and good mental health in younger students before they get to university. We want to put a real emphasis on good mental health from an early age all the way through, and access to mental health services in community, in your health clinic that you would go to see your family doctor. You could go see your mental health counselor, and that should be as normal as any other form of healthcare and not stigmatized. So that's one. I could go on. We certainly want to incentivize people to get educated in the areas that we really need staff. So we're going to be putting tuition aid and financial aid in place for people who want to study to become teachers, because we really need them to become family doctors, to become nurses, to become social workers, some of those key skills that are really missing across the public service spectrum in New Brunswick. We want to make it sort of really affordable to do that kind of post-secondary study.
Yeah, and all of these issues that you've mentioned, I know there's quite a few, but what would you outline as the main priority for the Liberal Party?
Well, it's healthcare. As we go to any community, right? It's consistent when you're knocking on doors. We run into so many New Brunswickers that don't have a family doctor. It's up to 180,000 New Brunswickers now that don't have a family doctor. Back in 2017, it was only about 7% of the population that didn't have access, and now it's more than 21% of the population. It's tripled in the last 7 years. And there's such a snowball effect to that, right? If you don't have a family doctor, you're probably not getting good preventative care. It means you're finding yourself at the ER for any ailment because there's nowhere else to go. And then the ERs get clogged and busy, and someone who has an actual emergency is struggling to get through the ER to get the health care they need in an urgent situation because it's full of people who don't have anywhere else to go. So we really need to tackle the issue of healthcare for New Brunswickers, and that means we need to change the system. We can't keep doing it the way that we've always done it. We talk to nurse practitioners and nurses and doctors and pharmacists and mental health counselors. They tell us they want to practice together as a team. Right? So that if you go on vacation, you're not worried about all of your patients being left behind because you know you have a team of people there to support your patients while you're gone. But they're struggling under the burden of a ton of administration. They're literally still standing at fax machines. Like in this day and age, using fax machines to try to get information to administration. They're on the phone trying to get referrals done. We want healthcare professionals to focus on patients, so we're going to put in place administrative supports in our collaborative care clinics so that we can have physicians seeing more patients and the right people doing paperwork. Healthcare is the number one thing. We already talked about mental health care, but that's what New Brunswickers are looking for, is to know that if they get sick or if their loved one gets sick, then they can trust that there is a place to go in community for help, that the ER is going to be able to serve them urgently like it's supposed to, and they're going to be able to get care.
Yeah, and part of that kind of goes into two fields that have been of issue in New Brunswick, especially recently, is nursing and teaching. What can and what could the Liberal Party do to help kind of put more emphasis on these fields and help support them?
Yeah, well, one of them is encouraging people to study in those fields by making it really affordable and accessible, right? So we have tuition help, financial aid in place to cover the costs of becoming a teacher or becoming a nurse because we need those people in our system. There's also actually a lot of teachers out there that aren't in the classroom right now, that left either during or after COVID because they were burnt out. And so we have to put programs in place to get them back in the classrooms. But that means we have to stabilize the classroom, because what teachers are dealing with right now is an overwhelming amount of challenges with students who have a ton of different needs, students that need help with being clothed, with being fed in schools, who have physical challenges, who have mental health challenges, with multiple linguistic environments where students are coming in without French or English, and teachers are spending their time translating materials and welcoming new students every week to their classrooms. The challenges in classrooms across New Brunswick are really big, and teachers are asking for help. They're asking for more teachers and more EAs and more guidance counselors and more resource supports so that they can serve these students with what they need, and the teacher can focus on teaching. There's real parallels to the healthcare system, actually, where we want to bring a team of people together to meet your healthcare needs in community when you need them. We need to bring a team of people together in the education system to support students and let teachers do what they do best, which is teach, and have the right people to support all the other needs of the students in their classroom. But making sure that that there's incentives and funding there for people who want to study and become qualified teachers is a key piece of it, right? We need that pipeline. And so we're prepared to invest in those tuition bursaries and that financial aid for education students.
Yeah, and one thing that's been growing recently in post-secondary education, especially at STU, is experiential learning, getting students more so in the field. How would a Liberal Party support that kind of education moving forward?
Yeah, we actually put a motion in the legislature some time ago now. I want to say it was either late 2022, maybe early 2023, to support paid internships, because in a lot of cases, students are doing real work for the government, for students, and it's the same in nursing. They're doing these internships unpaid. And not only unpaid, it's costing them, right? Because they either have to move to a new place to do that work, they have to get the equipment needed, that kind of thing. Certainly for nursing, it's pretty expensive to get yourself kitted out to go into a hospital or a clinic and perform that work. But then they're delivering valuable help to the system. Certainly student teachers, we see it. They're contributing really positively to students' education in New Brunswick. And they're doing work that they're not getting paid for. So we think paid internships need to be put in place for those kinds of, that kind of experiential education that is, that we lean on and we want to see more of.
Yeah, and more recent policies and statements made by current Premier Blaine Higgs, as well as some of his candidates, not to mention some of the flyers that we've gotten over the mail in the past couple months, make people on campus feel uncomfortable or threatened. What scares you about the future of inclusion in New Brunswick when it comes to things like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's really scary. What we're experiencing now in New Brunswick, I wouldn't have predicted when I got into the Liberal leadership race that this is where we would be, that we would have fallen backwards and become a place that is where students are living in fear because the leader of their province has come out against trans youth and non-binary youth and has encouraged people to see that as wrong or bad, right? Has participated in rallies and picked a side and really contributed to a divisive New Brunswick and a place where it's acceptable to express hate toward other New Brunswickers based on how they identify. But this Premier has done that time and time again. He's done it with Francophones, he's done it with First Nations people. He seems to not have the same respect for everyone's rights as the leader of this province should.
Right. And many students around campus are politically active. They're trying to get involved. We have plenty of promotion around campus now leading up to the polls that are starting here today and going until October 17th. But they might not see the value in voting. They might not see the importance in their vote. What can you say to students about the importance of making sure their voices get heard for this election?
Oh, it's really important. I mean, this is a particularly serious election because of what we just talked about. We have a leader that is making people unsafe in New Brunswick and has created an environment where people don't feel safe in school and on campuses. And that can't be acceptable. We can't just let our opportunity to vote against that kind of behavior and leadership go by without getting involved. But we also want people to vote for something, right? The more that people turn out to vote, the more that parties and this sort of political operation will prioritize their issues and their needs in their platforms and in their policy making. And so governments are more likely to act if they see that people have turned out and have voted in support of something. And so it's your chance to influence the agenda of government and to show that there is an active voting population here that has clear views on what they want the policies to look like going forward. So I've been pretty excited over this past, I've been the leader of the Liberal Party now just a little over 2 years. And I've been trying to refresh the party, right? It's a long-standing party, great tradition across the province, but it needed a refresh in terms of how we do things. And one of those is our Young Liberals Commission that's come alive again over this past year with some great folks from campus and campuses across New Brunswick that are getting together to participate in our policy-making process, to bring resolutions forward to our policy convention that we held in February, to contribute to our platform. And so there's specific policies in there that have come from the student voices that have helped us through this process. And so it really does make a difference.
Yeah, and finally, we're less than a week away from the election now. We're coming down, everything's coming down to the wire. What are your closing arguments to just people in New Brunswick in general, just leading up to this final week?
Well, we want everybody to get out and vote, and what we're asking people to do is really come together. We've spent a lot of the last 2 years getting divided by a premier that wants to put them over there and those other folks over here and try to turn us all against each other. I've recruited an amazing team of candidates from across the political spectrum. I have former Green candidates, I have former PC cabinet ministers, I have former NDP members that have all come together as part of a team that wants to change how we govern. We can't continue to be governed by one man in an office on the 6th floor of Chancery Place in Fredericton, because that's not how the system is supposed to work. Right? It's supposed to be 49 individuals who are expressing the needs of their community within a team in a team setting. And so far, everything has been centralized with this premier in one office. Our team is really keen to shift the power back out to the people and to communities where MLAs their job is to voice what their constituents need, and their communities look different. And so we've got to stop policy making with this one-size-fits-all notion that we can put a policy in place in some cubicle in Fredericton and have it apply to New Brunswickers in Sackville and in Saint-Quentin, right? That's not the reality of this beautiful province. New Brunswick is particularly unique because we're not just a couple big cities and a whole bunch of rural area. We are lots of different vibrant communities, different linguistic communities, different geographic realities, different natural realities, different industry profiles. And so we need to get back to grassroots government for the people by empowered MLAs who are going to speak up for those communities, and then policy making that is flexible and reflects different needs in different communities. That's what Team Holt is trying to do, is we've brought together the people that can really provide local representation, and our model of government going forward is a decentralized partnership model of bringing power back to the grassroots and to the people where it should be. And so I'm excited to bring that kind of change, and I'm asking all New Brunswickers to come together to help us defeat Mr. Higgs and to put this new approach to government and politics in place in New Brunswick.
All right, perfect. I believe that's all the questions I got for you today. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We know how busy you are. So it's great for you to drop by and speak to students on stuff like this.
Oh, look, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to students every time I get to come to STU. I love the questions, the organization, the engagement, like you say. There's lots of active participants in issues and in policies here on campus, and so I look forward to coming back.